This
On
is
her
what you
birthday,
chose.
her
should
husband
have
and
known
children
better.
handed her divorce papers and eviction
She
notices.
does not belong here.
The house, the business, the company, everything was gone. Her daughter sneered, calling her pathetic, while they all laughed, but she only smiled, signed without trembling, and walked away in silence. Within a week, her phone lit up with 42 desperate calls. Karma had arrived faster than expected. "Hi, my beautiful family. Today I pray with all my soul for you. May God surround your life with light so bright that no darkness can touch you. May He bless your health with strength, your hearts with peace, and your homes with endless love. May every woman here be uplifted with honor and dignity, every man guided with patience and wisdom, and every child protected with joy and laughter. I pray that no tear goes unseen, no pain goes unanswered, and no dream goes unfulfilled. May your burdens be lifted, your path cleared, and your future blessed beyond measure. May unity hold your families together, may kindness be your language, and may love be your shield in every storm. My beautiful family, you are not just viewers, you are my heart, my blessing, and my reason to continue. I cherish every one of you deeply. If your heart is with me, write, present. If your love is true, write, I am with Mr. Peter. There are moments when life strips away every illusion you've carefully built, leaving you naked before the truth of who people really are. The candlelight danced across Katie Harden's face as she sat at the head of her dining room table, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world. The crystal chandelier above cast warm shadows on the mahogany surface, and the scent of her favorite jasmine candles filled the air. She'd spent the entire day preparing for this dinner, her birthday celebration, cooking Danny's favorite roast, Brandy's beloved chocolate soufflé, and Gary's preferred garlic mashed potatoes. Everything perfect, everything exactly as her family liked it. Her hands were still slightly flour-dusted from kneading the bread dough that morning, and there was a small burn mark on her thumb from when she'd reached into the oven without thinking. These tiny sacrifices felt meaningful then, tokens of love baked into every dish. She'd even driven across town to that specialty butcher Danny preferred, the one that cost twice as much but made him smile when he took the first bite. "Make a wish." "Mom," Brandy said, her voice unusually flat as she pushed the cake forward. The vanilla layers stood tall, decorated with elegant roses made of buttercream, 43 candles flickering like tiny stars. Katie closed her eyes, her heart full of gratitude. She wished for many more years like this, surrounded by her family, in the home they'd built together, watching her children grow into the remarkable adults they were becoming. She wished for Brandy to find happiness in her career, for Gary to finally settle down, for Danny to take that vacation he'd been promising himself. Simple wishes, born from a mother's love and a wife's devotion. When she opened her eyes and blew out the candles, applause filled the room, but something felt different. The clapping seemed hollow, mechanical, like actors following a script. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "We have something special for you," Danny said, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. Her husband of 22 years reached into his jacket pocket, and for a wild moment, Katie thought he might be pulling out jewelry, perhaps the pearl necklace she'd admired in the store window last month. Instead, he slid a thick manila envelope across the table, the paper making a harsh scraping sound against the wood. "What's this?" Katie asked, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for it. The envelope felt heavy, ominous, like it contained something that could change everything. "Open it," Gary commanded, his phone already out, camera pointed directly at her face. Her son's eyes held a coldness she'd never seen before, a cruelty that made her stomach twist with dread. Katie's fingers fumbled with the metal clasp. Inside were papers, legal documents with official seals and lawyer letterheads. The words swam before her eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage, grounds irreconcilable differences, division of assets, spousal support, none requested. Divorce papers? The words came out as barely a whisper. On my birthday? We thought it was time for a fresh start, Danny said, his voice devoid of any emotion, any trace of the man who used to sing her to sleep when she had nightmares. For all of us. Brandy reached across the table and dropped another envelope in front of her mother. Your eviction notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Katie stared at her daughter, the little girl she'd rocked through countless fevers, whose scraped knees she'd kissed better, whose dreams she'd encouraged and supported through every failure and triumph. This is my home. Our home. Actually, it's not, Gary said, zooming in with his camera to capture every detail of her shock. The house was transferred to the family trust last year, the trust that you're no longer part of. I don't understand. Katie's hands shook as she rifled through more papers. Eviction notices, property transfers, bank account closures. Her entire life systematically dismantled while she'd been baking birthday cakes and folding their laundry. Danny leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You were always so trusting, Katie, so naive. Did you really think we needed you anymore? The words hit her like physical blows. I'm your wife. I'm your mother. You're dead weight, Brandy said, her voice sharp as a blade. We've been carrying you for years. The pathetic housewife who thinks she's important because she can make dinner and organize charity events. Katie looked around the table at these people who shared her blood, her name, her history. I built this family. I sacrificed everything for you. You sacrificed nothing, Gary sneered, still recording. You lived off Dad's success, played house in the mansion he provided, drove cars he paid for. You're a parasite, Mom, and parasites eventually get removed. The laughter started then, cruel, synchronized, like a pack of hyenas circling wounded prey. Danny's deep chuckle mixed with Brandy's high-pitched giggling and Gary's harsh bark of amusement. They were laughing at her pain, feeding off her confusion and heartbreak. The sound echoed off the walls she'd painted, bounced off the floors she'd polished, filled the space she'd turned into a sanctuary for them. Look at her face, Brandy whispered to Gary, loud enough for Katie to hear. She actually thought we loved her. Pathetic, Gary agreed, the word hitting Katie like a slap. Absolutely pathetic. Katie sat frozen, the papers scattered before her like pieces of her shattered life. Around her, the dining room she'd decorated with such care, the family photos on the sideboard showing birthdays and holidays and graduations, the children's artwork she'd framed and hung with such pride, the anniversary flowers Danny had sent just last week, still fresh in their vase. All of it felt like a stage set for a play she'd never auditioned for. Had those flowers been guilt? Had that entire gesture been part of this elaborate cruelty? The company, too, Danny said casually, as if discussing the weather. You'll be removed from all positions effective immediately. Your access to accounts, your credit cards, your memberships, everything's been cancelled. Even the country club, Brandy added with glee. Margaret Whitfield was so embarrassed when I told her you wouldn't be renewing your membership. She said it was social suicide. Katie's mind reeled. The country club, where she'd served on the charity board for 15 years, where she'd organized fundraisers that raised millions for children's hospitals, where she'd built relationships that had helped launch both her children's careers. Why? The word came out broken, barely audible. Why are you doing this? Because we can, Danny said simply. Because you're weak and weakness disgusts us. Because watching you pretend to be important all these years has been exhausting. Because you're nothing without us, Gary added, lowering his phone finally. And we're tired of pretending otherwise. Katie looked at each of their faces, searching for any trace of the people she'd loved, any flicker of remorse or recognition of what they were destroying. But she found only cold satisfaction, cruel joy in her devastation. Slowly, Katie reached for the pen Danny had placed beside the papers. Her hand was steady now, the trembling gone. Something inside her had shifted, crystallized into something harder than diamond. You want me to sign these? Every page, Brandy said. Don't try to fight it. We have lawyers, money, influence. You have nothing. Katie picked up the pen and began signing her name with careful, deliberate strokes. Katie Harden, Katie Harden, Katie Harden, each signature a small death. A burial of the woman who had believed in family and love, in the goodness of the people closest to her. When she finished, she set the pen down gently and stood up from the table. The dining room fell silent except for the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, the clock she'd bought for their 10th anniversary, the one Danny had claimed he loved. 30 days, she said quietly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. 30 days, Danny confirmed, already reaching for the wine bottle to celebrate. Katie walked toward the front door, her bare feet silent on the marble floors she'd chosen in the house she'd made a home. Behind her, the laughter started again, celebration of their victory, their freedom from the burden she'd apparently been. At the door, she paused and turned back one last time. They weren't even watching her leave, too busy toasting each other, planning their new lives without the dead weight of their wife and mother. Katie opened the door and stepped into the night. Rain had started falling, cold drops that soaked through her dress within moments. She walked barefoot down the driveway, past the gardens she'd planted, past the mailbox with their family name painted in elegant script. Behind her, warm light spilled from the dining room windows, and she could hear their voices growing louder, more animated. They were probably already discussing how to redecorate, how to erase every trace of her existence from their lives. But as Katie reached the street and felt the rain wash over her face, something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down, instead of collapsing under the weight of their betrayal, she smiled, because they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Chapter 2. The Architect's Secret. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from letting others believe you are weak. While you quietly hold all the cards, they think they've already played. Katie stood in the cramped studio apartment she'd rented, with the emergency cash she'd hidden in her jewelry box, surveying her new kingdom. 400 square feet of peeling wallpaper and a bathroom door that didn't quite close. The air mattress she'd bought from a discount store sat deflated in the corner, a far cry from the Egyptian cotton sheets and memory foam mattress she'd left behind. But as she looked around the tiny space, Katie felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors arguing, and the single window overlooked a brick wall. The kitchenette consisted of 2 burners and a mini fridge that hummed loudly at odd intervals. This was her empire now. This small, shabby room that cost more per month than seemed reasonable for what it offered. But it was hers. No one could take it from her. No one could vote her out or evict her from her own life anymore. The first thing she did was retrieve a small brass key from the lining of her purse. A key Danny and the children had never seen, never even knew existed. It belonged to a safety deposit box at First National Bank. A box she'd opened 20 years ago under her maiden name. A box that contained enough explosive material to turn her former family's world into ash. She'd sewn that key into the silk lining herself, using tiny stitches that were invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. How many times had Danny borrowed her purse to get something from the car? How many times had Brandy rifled through it looking for gum or lipstick? And never once had any of them discovered her secret, hidden in plain sight. The rain had stopped by the time she walked the 6 blocks to the bank, but her hair was still damp from her midnight exodus. The security guard, a kind elderly man named Walter, looked at her with concern as she approached the vault. "Mrs. Hardin, are you all right? You look like I've been through hell." Katie managed a wry smile. "Something like that, Walter. I need to access my box." He led her through the familiar routine: signatures, verification, the heavy steel door that opened to reveal rows of metal boxes. Hers was number 247, inconspicuous among hundreds of others. When Walter left her alone with her box, Katie's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the key. Inside were documents that would make any prosecutor salivate. Copies of Danny's offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, falsified tax returns spanning 15 years, emails detailing bribes to city officials, wire transfer receipts for money laundering operations. Every illegal transaction, every corrupt deal, every criminal activity Danny thought he'd hidden. Katie had known about it all. "You always were too arrogant for your own good," she whispered to the empty vault, remembering the nights Danny thought she was asleep while he conducted his dirty business in their home office. The nights she'd crept downstairs to photograph documents, to make copies, to build an insurance policy against the day she might need it. She remembered one particular night when Danny had gotten drunk after a deal went bad. He'd left his laptop open, passwords saved, files unencrypted. She'd spent 3 hours that night downloading everything while he snored upstairs. Bank statements, emails with co-conspirators, ledgers that showed 2 sets of books. She'd transferred it all to an encrypted drive and then cleared the browsing history, moving through his digital life like a ghost he'd never detect. But the financial crimes were just the beginning. Katie pulled out a thick folder labeled "The Real Story" in her careful handwriting. Inside were photographs, correspondence, and documents that would shatter the carefully constructed myth of Danny Vernon. Self-made businessman. The truth was, Danny Vernon had never built anything in his life. Every successful deal, every strategic partnership, every innovative idea that had launched their empire, it had all come from Katie. She was the one who'd identified the emerging markets, who'd cultivated relationships with international partners, who'd designed the strategies that turned a struggling small company into a powerhouse. Danny had been the face she'd put forward, the charming frontman who could schmooze clients while she did the real work behind the scenes. In a world that still questioned women's abilities, she'd chosen to build her empire through him, using his name and masculine confidence to open doors that might have remained closed to her. "I made you," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the small vault room. "I created every success you've ever had, and you threw me away like garbage." The irony was exquisite. Danny and the children thought they'd stripped her of everything, but they'd actually freed her from the pretense of needing them. For years, she'd played the supportive wife, the proud mother, letting them take credit for her work because she'd believed family mattered more than recognition. How naive she'd been. Katie pulled out her phone and began making calls. The first was to Rex King's private number, not the number Danny had always used for their biggest investor, but Rex's personal cell, which Katie had acquired during a dinner in Moscow 5 years ago when she'd impressed him with her understanding of Eastern European market dynamics. "Rex, it's Katie Hardin." "Katie!" His warm accent filled her with unexpected comfort. What a pleasant surprise. "How are you, my dear? I'm calling to inform you that I'm no longer associated with Vernon Industries, effective immediately. I wanted you to hear it from me personally before any official announcements." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Rex spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Katie, you were Vernon Industries. Without you," he paused, "I see. And what are your plans now?" "I'm starting fresh. Building something new, something honest. In that case, expect a call from my lawyers tomorrow morning. The King Group has some contracts to cancel." Katie smiled at his immediate understanding. Rex had always been perceptive, always known who really pulled the strings. "I appreciate your loyalty, Rex." "Loyalty?" He laughed. "Katie, this is pure self-interest. I don't invest in incompetent fools. I invest in brilliance, and you, my dear, are brilliant." After she hung up, Katie made 7 more calls to partners in Shanghai, investors in London, suppliers in Frankfurt. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock at her departure, immediate concern about their existing agreements, and barely concealed relief when she hinted that new opportunities might be available for the right partners. By the time she returned to her studio apartment, the sun was rising over the city. Katie sat on her air mattress, surrounded by the documents that contained enough evidence to send Danny to prison for the rest of his life. But prison was too easy, too quick. What she had planned would be far more devastating. She opened her laptop, the one Danny and the children didn't know about, the one registered under her maiden name, and began typing. The first email went to Rebecca Sterling, investigative journalist for the Financial Tribune, a woman Katie had met at a charity gala and who had impressed her with her tenacity and integrity. Rebecca, I have a story that will change everything you thought you knew about corruption in this city. Are you interested in exposing the truth about Vernon Industries? The second email went to Senator Harrison Mills, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, who had been trying to build a case against tax evasion for months. Katie attached a single document, one of Danny's Cayman Islands statements showing $7 million in unreported income. Senator Mills, I believe this might be relevant to your current investigation. More to follow if you're interested. The third email was to Wren Fox, her former assistant, the one person at Vernon Industries who knew exactly how much work Katie really did, who had watched Danny take credit for Katie's innovations for years. Wren, I know this morning will bring confusion and lies about my departure. When you're ready to work for someone who values loyalty and competence, call me. As Katie typed, she thought about the dinner table scene just hours ago, the laughter, the cruel joy they'd taken in her supposed defeat. They thought they'd destroyed her, but they'd actually just removed the chains that had been holding her back. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brandy. Hope you enjoyed your last night in a real bed. Mom's new apartment looks like a prison cell. Katie smiled as she typed back, Thank you for caring enough to check on me, sweetheart. Sleep well. The passive-aggressive kindness would drive Brandy crazy, but it was also a message. I'm not broken. I'm not defeated. I'm something else entirely. Another text, this one from Gary. Dad says you have 48 hours to get your junk out of the house, not 30 days. We're donating your clothes to charity tomorrow. Again, Katie responded with unnerving calm. How thoughtful of you to help those in need. Your generosity always was one of your best qualities. By noon, her phone was ringing constantly. Rex had kept his word. His lawyers were already moving to terminate contracts worth $40 million. Rebecca Sterling wanted to meet immediately. Senator Mills had forwarded her email to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Most importantly, Wren had called in tears. Katie, they're saying terrible things about you. That you were embezzling money, that you were a liability. But I know the truth. I've seen your work, your ideas, your strategies. Without you, this company is just Danny Vernon talking big with nothing to back it up. Would you like to work for me again, Wren? Real work this time, with full credit for your contributions. Where do I sign? As Katie hung up the phone, she looked around her tiny apartment one more time. Tomorrow, she would begin building something extraordinary. Not from scratch. She'd never been starting from scratch. She'd been building this empire for 20 years. One strategic relationship at a time, one innovative idea at a time, one moment of genuine connection at a time. Danny and the children thought they'd stolen her empire. But you can't steal something that was never really theirs to begin with. Her phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. Mrs. Harden. This is Kane Frost from Frost Holdings in London. Rex King suggested I call you. I believe we might have some mutually beneficial opportunities to discuss. Katie smiled, settling back against her thin pillow. The revolution was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Exodus begins. Loyalty is like a river. It always flows toward the source of its strength. And when that source shifts, the current changes direction with devastating speed. Danny Vernon stood in the marble lobby of Vernon Industries, watching his empire crumble one resignation letter at a time. The morning had started with such promise. Katie was gone, the dead weight finally cut loose, and he was free to run his company without her constant interference. He'd walked into the office feeling lighter than he had in years. Ready to show everyone what Danny Vernon could accomplish on his own. He'd even rehearsed a speech in his head during the drive-in, about new beginnings and fresh directions. He'd planned to gather the senior staff and announce Katie's departure with confidence, framing it as a necessary evolution for the company. He'd imagined their nods of agreement, their relief at finally being free from her meddling. But the building felt different the moment he walked through the doors. The usual morning energy was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. People avoided making eye contact with him in the hallways. Conversations stopped abruptly when he approached. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and he couldn't quite identify what it was. The first resignation had been waiting on his desk. Wren Fox, Katie's former assistant, with a letter so brief it was almost insulting. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position. Following true leadership. Thank you for the experience. Following true leadership? Danny had muttered, crumpling the letter. What the hell does that mean? By 10 o'clock, 3 more resignations had appeared. The head of international relations, the director of strategic planning, and the senior vice president of client development. All with the same cryptic phrase about following true leadership. Dad, we have a problem. Gary burst into Danny's office, his usual arrogance replaced by something approaching panic. Knox just quit. Knox Ward, from International Relations. I just saw his resignation. No, not just quit. He's taking the entire European division with him. Every major client contact, every ongoing negotiation, every strategic partnership we've built over the last decade. Danny felt the first flutter of real fear in his chest. Knox had been with the company for 8 years, a brilliant strategist who'd helped them expand into European markets. He can't do that. He has a non-compete clause. Apparently, Mom helped him structure his contract differently than everyone else's. His non-compete only applies to companies in direct competition with Vernon Industries. Whatever he's planning doesn't qualify. Danny's mind reeled. Katie had structured Knox's contract. When had she even been involved in that level of detail? He'd always thought she just showed up to meetings, smiled at clients, made small talk. But now, pieces were clicking into place that he'd never wanted to see. Her quiet conversations with key employees, her notes during contract negotiations, her suggestions that he'd always dismissed as wifely concerns. Before Danny could respond, Brandy stormed in, her face flushed with rage. Someone needs to explain to me why Nova Price just cancelled our biggest contract. Danny stared at his daughter. The Price Group? That's a $12 million account. Was a $12 million account, Brandy snapped. Nova said her company only worked with Vernon Industries because of their deep respect for Katie Hardin's vision and integrity. Now that Mom's gone, they're reassessing their partnerships. The office door opened again, and Cassandra Wells, their head of human resources, entered with a stack of papers that seemed to grow thicker each time Danny saw her. We're up to 15 resignations as of 11:30, Cassandra announced, her voice carefully neutral. All from senior positions, all citing philosophical differences with new leadership direction. This is insane, Gary said, pacing behind his father's desk. It's like they all planned this. Maybe they did, Danny muttered, remembering Katie's calm demeanor the night before. The way she'd signed those papers without a single tear, without begging or pleading or breaking down the way he'd expected. Maybe she poisoned them against us before she left. Brandy laughed bitterly. Right, because Mom was so influential. Please, these people are just using her departure as an excuse to jump ship. They probably had better offers waiting. But even as she said it, Brandy didn't sound convinced. The mass exodus felt too coordinated, too purposeful to be coincidental. Danny's intercom buzzed. Mr. Vernon, there's a Rex King on line 1. He says it's urgent. Danny's blood turned to ice. Rex King, their biggest investor, the man whose partnership had funded their expansion into Asian markets, whose $40 million contribution had made Vernon Industries a major player. Rex! Danny forced enthusiasm into his voice as he picked up the phone. What can I do for you? Danny! Rex's accent was colder than Danny had ever heard it. I'm calling to inform you that King Holdings will be terminating our partnership agreement effective immediately. What? But we have contracts which include a morality clause that allows either party to withdraw if the partnership no longer aligns with our values. Danny gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean exactly? It means I invested in Katie Hardin's vision, not in whatever you think you're running now. Without her strategic guidance, her international connections, her innovative thinking, Vernon Industries is just another mid-tier company with delusions of grandeur. Now wait just a minute. I'm afraid I don't have a minute to wait. Danny, my lawyers are already drafting the withdrawal papers. You'll have them by close of day. This is ridiculous. I built this company. I made those connections. But Rex had already hung up. Gary and Brandy stared at their father, watching the color drain from his face as the magnitude of their situation began to sink in. What did he say? Brandy whispered. He's pulling out. $40 million gone. He can't do that. Apparently he can. The phone rang again, almost immediately. Danny's secretary's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Vernon, I have Dmitry Volkov from Moscow Holdings on line 2, Kai Storm from Pacific Rim Industries on line 3, and Vera Moon from South American Ventures on line 4. They all say it's urgent. Danny closed his eyes, already knowing what those calls would bring. One by one, he watched their international partnerships dissolve like sugar in rain. Each conversation followed the same pattern: respect for Katie, disappointment in her departure, and immediate withdrawal from any ongoing projects. By lunchtime, Vernon Industries had lost 60% of its international accounts, 40% of its senior staff, and nearly all of its major investment partnerships. This has to be sabotage, Gary said, his voice shaking with rage. She's poisoning everyone against us. How? Brandy demanded. She doesn't have any connections. She was just a housewife. But even as she said it, Brandy was remembering things. Charity galas, where important people sought Katie out for conversation. Dinners, where Katie's opinions carried more weight than Danny's. International trips, where Katie's presence seemed to matter more than her father's. She remembered one trip to Singapore, where a potential partner had spent the entire dinner talking to Katie, barely acknowledging Danny's existence. She'd thought it was odd at the time, but dismissed it as the man being polite to the wife. We need to fight back, Danny said, his voice growing stronger as his anger built. We'll sue her for breach of contract, for corporate sabotage, for whatever we can make stick. Cassandra cleared her throat. Actually, Mr. Vernon, we've reviewed Katie's contracts and agreements. She never actually signed a non-compete clause. Her employment was structured as a consulting arrangement. What does that mean? It means she was never technically an employee. She was an independent contractor providing strategic services. She can work for anyone she wants immediately. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only had Katie escaped without legal restrictions, but she'd done so with the knowledge and connections that had built their success. And she'd been planning this escape for years, structuring her own employment in a way that gave her complete freedom. How had Danny never noticed? There's something else, Cassandra continued reluctantly. We've been reviewing the company's strategic documentation, and it appears that most of our major innovations, our market analysis, our partnership strategies, they all have Katie's fingerprints on them. What are you saying? I'm saying that when people talked about Vernon Industries' brilliant strategic vision, they weren't talking about vision that came from you. Danny's office door burst open, and his secretary rushed in without knocking. Mr. Vernon, you need to see this. She thrust a tablet into his hands, showing a breaking news alert on the Financial Tribune's website. Exclusive. Investigation launched into Vernon Industries following whistleblower evidence. Danny read the first paragraph and felt his world collapse completely. Following a tip from an unnamed source with intimate knowledge of Vernon Industries' operations, federal investigators have launched a probe into allegations of tax evasion, money laundering, and bribery involving millions in unreported offshore accounts. She wouldn't, Brandy whispered, reading over her father's shoulder. But Gary was staring at his phone, his face white with shock. She would. She already has. What do you mean? I just got a call from my contact at the SEC. They're freezing our assets pending investigation. All of them. Danny sank into his chair, the tablet slipping from his numb fingers. Around him, his children stared in growing horror as the reality of their situation crystallized. Katie hadn't just left them. She detonated a bomb that had been hidden in their foundation for years, waiting for the moment when she decided to stop protecting them from their own corruption. "How did she know?" Danny whispered. But even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. She'd always known. She'd known about every illegal transaction, every bribe, every hidden account. And instead of stopping him or reporting him, she'd simply documented everything. The phone rang again, but this time no one moved to answer it. Outside his office windows, Danny could see employees packing their desks, security guards escorting people out, and reporters gathering in the lobby. In less than 24 hours, they'd gone from celebrating their freedom to watching their empire burn, and Katie was nowhere to be found. Chapter 6. The golden connection breaks. Power is not about what you can take from others. It's about what others willingly give you and what happens when they decide to take it back. 3 days after Katie's departure, Kane Frost sat in his London office overlooking the Thames, pouring aged whiskey into crystal glasses for himself and his guest. Across from him, a woman he'd known for 5 years, sat with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards in a game everyone else was still trying to understand. The office itself was a testament to old money and new power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions, a Persian rug that had belonged to his grandfather, and modern technology seamlessly integrated into the traditional decor. Rain pattered against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy in the grey afternoon light. "You look well, Katie," Kane said, raising his glass in salute. "Remarkably well for someone who's just been through what the papers are calling a bitter family divorce." Katie smiled, accepting the glass, but not yet drinking. "Freedom suits me, apparently." "I imagine it does." Kane settled back in his leather chair, studying her face. "When you called and asked for this meeting, I'll admit I was intrigued. Danny's been calling my office every hour since I withdrew our partnership, alternating between threats and desperate pleas. He's scared. He should be. Without our 40 million, Vernon Industries is hemorrhaging money. Their stock price has dropped 30% in 3 days, and that's before the investigation becomes public knowledge." Katie took a small sip of whiskey, savoring the smooth burn. "And what did you tell him when he called?" "The truth. That I've never invested in Danny Vernon. I've always invested in you. Your market analysis, your strategic vision, your ability to forge genuine relationships in markets where trust is everything." Kane leaned forward. "Which brings me to why you're really here. I have a proposition. I was hoping you might." Katie opened the leather portfolio she'd brought with her, removing a bound document that looked more like a manifesto than a plan. "I'm starting something new, something clean, something honest, something that will make Vernon Industries look like a corner convenience store." Kane accepted the document, his eyebrows rising as he flipped through the first few pages. "Obsidian Enterprises? From the ashes of what was destroyed, something stronger emerges, and you want my backing. I want your partnership. There's a difference." Kane read in silence for several minutes, occasionally making soft sounds of appreciation or surprise. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted from polite interest to genuine excitement. "This is ambitious. Some might say impossible. Some might say the same thing about a housewife bringing down a multi-million-dollar empire in 72 hours. Touché." Kane closed the document and met her eyes. "What do you need?" initial capital, credibility, and access to your European networks. In return, you get 40% ownership in what will become the most innovative consulting firm this century has seen. 40%. That's generous. It's fair. I provide the vision and the strategy. You provide the foundation and the connections. We build something neither of us could create alone. Kane was quiet for a long moment, swirling whiskey in his glass while he considered. Outside his windows, London bustled with its usual energy, but inside the office, time seemed suspended. "There's something you should know," he said finally. "Danny tried to offer me a deal yesterday. 50% ownership in Vernon Industries if I'd reconsider the withdrawal. And I told him he was trying to sell me something that had never belonged to him in the first place." Katie's smile was sharp as a blade. "What did he say to that?" "He hung up on me, but not before shouting something about how you were just a woman and how I was making a mistake backing you over the man who built the empire." "The man who built the empire," Katie repeated softly. "How interesting that he still believes that." Kane leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "Katie, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Of course. How long have you been planning this?" Katie was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I wasn't planning it exactly. I was preparing for it. There's a difference between plotting someone's destruction and simply being ready when they destroy themselves. And Danny destroyed himself. Danny destroyed us both. The difference is, I prepared for survival by documenting his illegal activities, by protecting myself and anyone who might be collateral damage when his house of cards finally fell." Kane nodded slowly. "You know, I've done deals with corrupt men before. The difference with Danny was that I always assumed you were aware of his activities and chose to look the other way for the sake of your family. I was aware, but I was also trapped. Leaving meant losing my children, my home, everything I'd built. So I stayed, and I documented, and I waited for the day when staying became more dangerous than leaving." "And that day was your birthday?" "That day was when they made it clear that they'd never seen me as family at all. Just as dead weight, they'd finally found the courage to cut loose." Kane raised his glass again. "To their loss and our gain, then." They drank in companionable silence, but Katie wasn't finished. "There's something else you should know, Kane. This isn't just about starting a new company. Vernon Industries is going to collapse completely, and when it does, there will be a vacuum in the markets they used to serve. I intend to fill that vacuum with Obsidian Enterprises, with something better than Vernon Industries ever was or could have been." Kane set down his glass and picked up his phone. "Margaret? Cancel my afternoon meetings and get me Rex King in Moscow, Kai Storm in Tokyo, and Vera Moon in Sao Paulo. Tell them it's priority one." He hung up and looked at Katie with something approaching admiration. "You're not just planning to compete with Vernon Industries, are you? You're planning to replace it entirely. I'm planning to make it irrelevant, and your family—" Katie's expression hardened. "My former family chose to make themselves my enemies. They'll be treated accordingly." The phone rang, and Kane answered on the first ring. "Rex, yes, she's here with me now. You were right. It's time to discuss new arrangements." As Kane spoke in rapid Russian, Katie pulled out her own phone and began scrolling through messages. 17 missed calls from Danny, 12 from Brandy, 8 from Gary. She deleted them all without listening. Each deleted call felt like shedding another layer of dead skin, revealing the new person she was becoming underneath. There was also a text from Wren. "The FBI raided Vernon Industries this morning. Danny, Gary, and Brandy were escorted out in handcuffs for questioning. It's all over the news." Katie showed the message to Kane, who was just finishing his call with Rex. "Well," he said, reading the text, "that escalated quickly. I imagine their lawyers will get them released soon enough, but the damage to their reputation will be permanent, and you feel no guilt about that?" Katie considered the question seriously. I feel sadness about what our family could have been if they'd chosen differently, but guilt, no. They made their choices with full knowledge of the consequences. I simply stopped protecting them from those consequences. Kane's phone rang again, this time Kai from Tokyo, eager to discuss investment opportunities with Katie directly. As he took the call, Katie walked to the window and looked out over London's skyline. Somewhere across the ocean, her former family was learning what it felt like to lose everything. But she felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a deep sense of relief that she was finally free to build something worthy of the vision she'd carried for so long. Her phone buzzed with another message. This one from an unknown number. Mrs. Hardin, this is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates. We represent several international firms interested in discussing partnership opportunities with your new venture. Would you be available for a conference call this afternoon? Katie smiled and typed back, I'll have my assistant Ren coordinate scheduling. We have a great deal to discuss. As Kane finished his call and turned back to her, Katie felt the final pieces of her new empire clicking into place. So, he said, refilling their glasses, when do we make this official? How about now? Kane pulled out a fountain pen and signed his name to the partnership agreement with a flourish. To Obsidian Enterprises and to the most remarkable woman I've ever had the pleasure of doing business with. Katie signed her own name with steady strokes, each letter a small act of revolution. Now, she said, capping the pen, let's go build something extraordinary. Outside, London hummed with possibility, and somewhere across the ocean, an empire built on lies was crumbling to dust, but Katie Hardin was no longer looking backward. Chapter 5. Scandal and Collapse. Pride goes before a fall, but arrogance builds the very cliff from which it will plunge into oblivion. Danny Vernon sat in the holding cell at the federal courthouse, his expensive suit wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled for the first time in decades. Across from him, Gary paced like a caged animal, while Brandy huddled in the corner, her designer makeup streaked with tears that had nothing to do with remorse and everything to do with humiliation. The cell smelled of disinfectant and desperation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made them all look older, defeated, broken. Danny kept touching his hair, trying to smooth it back into place, as if fixing his appearance could somehow fix the catastrophic situation they found themselves in. His $1,000 suit hung on him, like a costume from a play that had closed abruptly, leaving the actors stranded on an empty stage. This is impossible, Danny kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make it true. They can't prove anything. It's all circumstantial. Dad, Gary stopped pacing and stared at his father. They have bank records, actual documents with your signature, wire transfers to accounts in your name. Those could be forged. The handwriting experts say they're authentic. Brandy looked up from her corner, her voice raw from crying. How did she know, Dad? How did Mom know about the offshore accounts? Danny's silence stretched uncomfortably long. The truth was, he'd never been particularly careful about hiding his activities from Katie. Why would he? She was just his wife, just a woman who spent her days organizing charity events and redecorating rooms. It had never occurred to him that she might be watching, documenting, preparing. He'd had entire conversations about his illegal dealings while she was in the next room, assuming she wasn't listening or wouldn't understand the significance. How many times had he left incriminating documents on his desk, thinking she'd never look? How many late-night phone calls had he taken in their bedroom, believing she was asleep? She was supposed to be loyal, he finally said, the words bitter in his mouth. Wives are supposed to be loyal. Loyal? Gary laughed harshly. We threw her out on her birthday. We humiliated her, called her pathetic, took everything from her. What exactly did we think was going to happen? We thought she'd crawl away and disappear, Brandy whispered. We thought she was weak. The cell door opened, and their lawyer, Thomas Hartwell, entered with an expression that told them everything they needed to know before he spoke a word. "The prosecutors aren't interested in a deal," he said without preamble. "They have too much evidence, and this case is too high profile. The media is calling it the birthday betrayal. They're painting Katie as the wronged wife who finally found the courage to expose her corrupt family." "That's not what happened," Brandy exploded. "She planned this. She set us up." "Actually," Thomas consulted his notes, "according to the evidence, she did nothing illegal. She simply provided documentation of crimes that had already been committed. The FBI considers her a whistleblower, not a conspirator." Danny felt something break inside his chest. A whistleblower. The media loves a good David and Goliath story, and right now Katie is David, the wronged woman who brought down the corrupt empire. It's already being called one of the most dramatic takedowns in modern history. Gary sank onto the narrow bench. "What about the company?" "Finished. Stock price collapsed this morning when the markets opened. Trading has been suspended pending the investigation, but even if charges are eventually dropped, Vernon Industries is done. No one will do deals with you now, but we're innocent until proven guilty," Brandy protested. Thomas looked at her with something approaching pity. "In a court of law, yes. In the court of public opinion, you've already been convicted. The evidence is damning, the story is compelling, and frankly, none of you are particularly sympathetic defendants." Danny's phone, which had been returned to him after processing, buzzed with notifications. Against his better judgment, he looked at the screen. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of social media mentions, news alerts with headlines that made his stomach turn. Vernon Industries CEO arrested in massive fraud scheme. Family drama, wife exposes husband's criminal empire. The birthday that brought down a dynasty. But it was the photos that really destroyed him. Someone had leaked pictures from that dinner, Gary's video from his phone, apparently uploaded before the FBI seized their devices. The images showed Katie's face as she read the divorce papers, the shock and pain in her eyes, and then the cruel laughter of her family as they celebrated her destruction. "Where did these photos come from?" Danny demanded. Thomas glanced at the phone. "Your son posted them on social media the night of the dinner. They've been shared millions of times. And birthday betrayal is trending worldwide." Gary's face went white. "I didn't think. I was just showing off. You filmed our mother's humiliation and posted it online." Brandy stared at her brother in horror. "It was funny at the time. How was I supposed to know that she'd what? Fight back? Defend herself? God, Gary, you're even stupider than I thought." Danny looked at his children, really looked at them, and saw what the rest of the world was seeing. Spoiled, entitled, cruel. The kind of people who would humiliate their own mother for entertainment, who would throw away decades of love and sacrifice for the momentary pleasure of feeling superior. "The worst part," Thomas continued, "is that public sentiment is completely against you. The FBI has been flooded with tips from former employees willing to testify about the toxic culture at Vernon Industries, about how Katie was the real brains behind the operation while you three took all the credit. That's not true." Danny protested. "Isn't it?" Thomas pulled out a tablet and showed them a news interview. "This is Wren Fox, Katie's former assistant. She's been giving interviews all morning." On the screen, Wren sat across from a news anchor, her face earnest and sincere. "People think Katie was just a housewife, but that's not true. She was the strategic mind behind every major deal Vernon Industries ever made. She'd spend weeks researching markets, building relationships, developing proposals, and then Danny would take credit for everything. She was brilliant, innovative, and completely undervalued by her own family." The anchor asked about the dinner. Thomas noted grimly. On screen, Wren's expression hardened. "I've seen the video. What they did to her was cruel beyond words. After everything she'd given them, everything she'd sacrificed for their success, they threw her away like garbage. They got exactly what they deserved." Danny clicked off the tablet, but the damage was done. The narrative was set, and they were the villains. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every conversation in every coffee shop across the country, they were all saying the same thing. The Vernon family were monsters who got their karma. There's more, Thomas said. The charity organizations Katie worked with have released statements distancing themselves from Vernon Industries. The country club has revoked your memberships. Your children's friends are posting on social media about how they always knew something was wrong with that family. Brandy started crying again. My friends are abandoning me. People I've known since childhood are acting like I'm contagious. Because you are, Gary said bitterly. We all are. We're toxic now. The family that destroyed the saint. Katie's not a saint, Danny shouted, his control finally snapping. She's vindictive and calculating and smarter than all of us combined, Gary finished. Face it, Dad. We played checkers while she was playing chess, and she just declared checkmate. The cell fell silent except for Brandy's quiet sobbing. Outside, they could hear the rumble of media trucks, the shouts of reporters calling questions they'd never be able to answer satisfactorily. Thomas cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The prosecutors want to make an example of this case. They're pushing for maximum sentences if you're convicted. We're talking decades in federal prison. But we can fight this, Danny said desperately. We can hire better lawyers, spin the story differently. With what money? Thomas asked bluntly. Your assets are frozen. Your company is worthless. Your reputation is destroyed. No law firm is going to take this case on contingency because, frankly, it's unwinnable. Danny stared at his hands, finally understanding the full scope of what Katie had done. She hadn't just exposed his crimes. She'd systematically destroyed every pillar of their lives. Their money, their positions, their social standing, their family relationships, their future prospects. Everything they'd built, everything they'd taken for granted, gone in less than a week. How did she do it? He whispered. Thomas looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. By being prepared for the day when you showed your true colors, and by having something you never had, the moral high ground. A guard appeared at the cell door. Vernon family, time to go. As they were led out in handcuffs for the second time that day, photographers captured every moment. Danny caught a glimpse of himself on a television screen in the courthouse lobby, disheveled, defeated, broken. The caption underneath read, "The Fall of a Dynasty." But it wasn't just the fall of a dynasty. It was the complete and total destruction of everything they'd thought they were, replaced by the ugly truth of what they'd actually become. And somewhere in the world, Katie Hardin was building something beautiful from the ashes of their corruption. Chapter 6, The House of Cards Falls. A house built on lies will always collapse, but the cruelest irony is when it buries the very people who constructed its false foundation. Brandy Vernon stood on the marble steps of what had been her home for 20 years, watching strangers in uniform carry out the furniture she'd grown up with. The federal marshals were efficient and emotionless as they executed the asset seizure warrant, treating priceless antiques and cherished family heirlooms like items in a warehouse inventory. The morning sun beat down mercilessly, making everything feel surreal and overexposed. Brandy could see neighbors peeking through curtains, documenting her family's humiliation with their phones. Mrs. Chen from across the street was pretending to water her already drenched garden, watching every moment of the spectacle. The same woman who had gushed over Brandy's prom dress and congratulated her on her college acceptance now stared with barely concealed satisfaction. Careful with that, she called out as two men hauled her grandmother's china cabinet toward a waiting truck. That's been in our family for generations. Not your family anymore, miss, one of the marshals replied without looking up. Everything in this house is considered proceeds of criminal activity until the courts decide otherwise. The words hit her like a physical blow. Proceeds of criminal activity. Everything she'd touched, everything she'd loved, everything that had made her feel safe and important, all of it tainted now. All of it stolen. Gary appeared beside her, his face haggard, and his clothes the same ones he'd worn to jail 3 days ago. They won't even let us take personal items. My college diplomas, my sports trophies, they're taking everything. Where's Dad? Still inside, begging them to let him keep Mom's wedding ring collection. As if he has any right to those after what he did to her. Brandy watched her father through the living room window, pleading with a federal agent who looked bored and impatient. Danny Vernon, who had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors, reduced to groveling for trinkets. "This is all her fault," Brandy whispered. But the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Is it?" Gary turned to look at his sister. "Really? Because I keep thinking about that night, about what we did to her, and I can't figure out how we became such monsters." "We're not monsters. We're victims." "Victims." Gary laughed bitterly. "Brandy, have you seen the video? I mean, really watched it. We destroyed our own mother for fun. We celebrated breaking her heart. What does that make us?" Before Brandy could answer, a sleek black sedan pulled into their circular driveway. She recognized the driver immediately. Evelyn Ashworth, the realtor who had sold them this house 2 decades ago, who had become a family friend over the years. Evelyn emerged from the car with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Brandy, Gary, I'm so sorry about all this. Are you here to help us?" Brandy asked desperately. "Maybe you could talk to the marshals, explain that some of these things have sentimental value." "Actually," Evelyn interrupted gently, "I'm here in my professional capacity. The house has been sold." "Sold?" Gary stared at her. "But it's our house. It's been our house for... It was collateral for several loans that are now in default. The bank has exercised its right to immediate sale to recover the debt." Brandy felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Who bought it?" Evelyn hesitated, consulting her tablet. "The purchase was made through a holding company called Obsidian Holdings." The name hit them both like a thunderbolt. Obsidian, the same name as Katie's new venture that had been mentioned in the news reports. Their mother hadn't just walked away. She'd circled back to take the very ground from beneath their feet. "Mom bought our house." Gary's voice cracked on the words. "The sale was completed this morning. The new owners take possession immediately." As if summoned by their conversation, another car appeared at the end of the driveway. This one was modest, a simple sedan that looked almost humble compared to the luxury vehicles that usually graced their circular drive. But when the driver stepped out, both Gary and Brandy felt their world tilt completely off its axis. Katie Hardin walked toward them with quiet confidence. Dressed simply in jeans and a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger somehow, lighter, as if throwing off the weight of their family had restored something vital in her. "Hello," she said politely, as if addressing strangers rather than the children she'd raised. Brandy found her voice first. "You bought our house." "I bought my house," Katie corrected gently. "The one I designed, the one I decorated, the one I turned into a home while you all lived in it." "This is sick," Gary snarled. "You're sick. What kind of mother destroys her own children like this?" Katie's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "What kind of children destroy their own mother like you did?" The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Around them, the marshals continued their work, loading a lifetime of possessions into trucks, while the family that had once owned them fell apart on the front steps. Danny emerged from the house, his face red with anger and desperation. When he saw Katie, he stopped dead in his tracks. "You!" he breathed. "You did this." "I bought a house," Katie said simply. "Just like you bought divorce papers and eviction notices for my birthday. This was our home." "This was my home. You made that very clear when you threw me out of it." Danny stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You vindictive witch. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? You set us up, manipulated us." "I documented your crimes and protected myself when you chose to discard me," Katie interrupted, her voice steady and calm. Everything that's happening to you is the direct result of choices you made. We're your family." "No," Katie said quietly. "You were my family. Until you decided I was dead weight and threw me away." Brandy stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. Can't we fix this? Can't we be a family again?" For just a moment, Katie's composure cracked, and they saw a flash of the woman who had loved them unconditionally for so many years. But then her expression hardened again. "You called me pathetic, Brandy. You said I was worthless. You laughed when I signed away everything I'd built. You recorded my humiliation and shared it with the world for your own entertainment." Katie's voice was quiet, but each word landed like a blow. "Tell me, what part of that was family love? We were angry. You were cruel. There's a difference." A news van pulled up at the end of the driveway, followed by another and another. Within minutes, cameras were rolling, and reporters were calling out questions. The humiliation of their eviction was about to become public entertainment. "Please," Gary said desperately, "don't let them film this. We'll go quietly. Just don't let them turn this into a circus." Katie looked at the gathering media, then back at her former family. "You turned my birthday into a circus. You filmed my pain and shared it with the world. Now you know how that feels." She walked past them toward the front door of her house now, pausing only when Danny grabbed her arm. "I'll fight this," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll take you to court. I'll prove you manipulated everything. You'll what?" Katie asked calmly. "Fight me with what money? Sue me with which lawyers? You have nothing left, Danny, nothing except the consequences of your own choices." She gently removed his hand from her arm and continued toward the door. Behind her, the cameras captured every moment as the Vernon family was forced to leave their home with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Evelyn approached them with a clipboard. "There's a moving truck waiting to take you to temporary housing. The court has arranged for a small apartment until your legal situation is resolved." An apartment? Brandy's voice was barely a whisper. "A one-bedroom efficiency downtown. It's what the court-appointed social services could arrange on short notice." Gary looked back at the mansion, at the swimming pool where he'd hosted parties, at the tennis court where he'd impressed dates, at the guest house where he'd planned to live rent-free for the rest of his life. "From a mansion to a one-bedroom apartment," he said hollowly. "At least you have somewhere to go," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "Many people in your situation end up homeless." Before they climbed into the truck, Gary's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, staring at the screen with growing horror. "What now?" Brandy asked. "Someone just bought my signed baseball card collection on the auction site for $300. I paid $15,000 for those cards." He'd spent the last week listing everything he owned online: his watch collection, his designer suits, his electronics, even his college textbooks. The same items he'd once bragged about now, sold for pennies on the dollar to strangers who recognized his name and knew he was desperate. The comments on his listings were brutal. "Karma's expensive, huh? And should have been nicer to your mom." $300, Gary repeated, his voice hollow. "That's what my life is worth now." As they climbed into the back of the moving truck with their few remaining possessions, clothes, a few books, and personal items the court had deemed non-criminal, Brandy caught one last glimpse of Katie standing in the doorway of their former home. Their former mother, was holding a small potted plant, one of the jasmine plants she'd always loved. She was replanting it in a window box, making the house hers again. "She's erasing us," Brandy whispered. "No," Gary said, watching Katie tend to her flowers. "She's moving on, like we should have let her do in the first place." 3 days later, Brandy stood outside the luxury boutique where she'd been shopping since she was 16. She'd just finished her shift at the coffee shop, still wearing her apron with coffee stains and smelling of espresso and steamed milk. She'd parked her leased BMW in the loading zone, running in for just 5 minutes to pick up a dress she'd ordered before everything fell apart. When she emerged from the store, dress bag in hand, a tow truck was backing up to her car. "Wait! That's my car!" she shouted, running toward it. "Not according to the bank," the tow truck driver said, hooking chains to the BMW's frame. "Lease payments 3 months overdue. I'm authorized to repossess. But I need that car. I need it for work." "Should have made your payments, lady." A crowd was gathering, people with their phones out, recording. Brandy recognized some of them. Former friends from the country club, girls she'd gone to private school with, women who'd smiled at her at charity galas. "Is that Brandy Vernon?" Someone whispered, not quietly enough. "Oh my God, it is! Her car's being repossessed." Didn't she just throw her mom out on the street? Calm as a bitch. The tow truck lifted her BMW, her last symbol of the life she'd had, while dozens of people filmed and laughed. Brandy stood there, still clutching her dress bag, watching her car disappear down the street. Someone bumped into her and the bag fell, the white dress spilling onto the dirty sidewalk. She left it there and walked to the bus stop, tears streaming down her face, while the videos of her humiliation were already going viral with the hashtag #RaBirthdayBetrayal. That same afternoon, Danny sat alone in a corner booth at the country club, nursing a whiskey. He'd been coming here for 15 years, had served on the board, had been toasted and celebrated in this very room. He'd called 6 of his closest friends, men he'd golfed with, done deals with, celebrated victories with, men who'd been at his wedding, who'd attended his children's graduations. The first one had texted back, "Sorry, busy." The second didn't respond at all. The third sent, "Think it's best we don't associate right now. Hope you understand." Jonathan Pierce walked into the club, saw Danny, and immediately turned around and walked back out. They'd been friends for 12 years. Jonathan was Gary's godfather. Michael Stratton, who'd been Danny's best man, walked right past his table without acknowledging him. When Danny called out his name, Michael paused, then said coldly, "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." Vernon and kept walking. The bartender, who used to call him Mr. V and always had his drink ready, now avoided eye contact. Danny finished his whiskey alone, in the club where he'd once been king, surrounded by people who pretended he didn't exist. When he asked for his check, the manager appeared. "Mr. Vernon, I'm afraid your membership has been revoked. You'll need to settle your tab and leave." "Revoked? On what grounds?" "The board voted. Unanimous decision. You're no longer welcome here." Danny paid his tab and walked out through the lobby he'd walked through 1,000 times, past photos on the wall that included his face, though he noticed they were already being taken down. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard Blackwell, his supposed closest friend. "Lost 50 grand because I vouched for you. Don't ever contact me again." Danny stood in the parking lot, watching members arrive for dinner, laughing and greeting each other. Not one of them looked his way. It was as if he'd become invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a life that had once been his. He got into his beat-up used sedan, the only car he could afford now, and drove back to the one-bedroom apartment where his children waited, all of them clinging to the wreckage of a life they'd destroyed with their own hands. The truck pulled away, carrying them toward their new reality, a cramped apartment, minimum-wage jobs, and the knowledge that they'd destroyed the one person who had truly loved them. Behind them, Katie Harden stood in the doorway of her reclaimed home, watching them disappear into the distance. She felt no joy in their suffering, but she felt no regret either. Justice, she had learned, was not always about punishment. Sometimes it was simply about truth, finally catching up with lies. Chapter 7. Phoenix Rising. From the ashes of betrayal rises something far more powerful than what was destroyed. Not revenge, but renewal. Not bitterness, but brilliance. Katie stood in the executive office of Obsidian Enterprises, looking out over the city skyline, through floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the morning light like liquid gold. 3 months had passed since she'd walked out of her birthday dinner in the rain, and the contrast between that broken woman and the powerhouse she'd become was nothing short of miraculous. The office itself reflected her new philosophy: clean lines, natural materials, plants thriving in every corner. Where Danny's office had been all dark wood and intimidation, Katie's space breathed with possibility. The walls were lined with photographs of the people who'd helped her build this new empire. Their smiling faces a constant reminder that success built on genuine relationships was far more satisfying than power built on fear. "The Tokyo partnership is confirmed," Ren announced from the doorway, her voice bright with excitement. "Kai Storm wants to sign the exclusive distribution deal for all of Southeast Asia." Katie turned from the window, a smile playing at her lips. "And the terms?" "Everything we asked for, plus a signing bonus that's larger than Vernon Industries' entire annual revenue in their best year." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. In 3 months, Katie had built something that dwarfed what Danny had spent 20 years creating. And she'd done it with honor, transparency, and genuine innovation. "Ren, remind me to send Kai something special for his daughter's wedding. She's getting married next month, and I remember him mentioning she loves orchids." "Already taken care of. I've arranged for a custom orchid arrangement from that specialty florist in Kyoto you recommended." This was the difference, Katie reflected. Danny had always treated relationships as transactions. Katie treated them as actual relationships, remembering birthdays, celebrating successes, offering support during difficult times. It was a simple concept that had revolutionary results. The intercom chimed softly. "Mrs. Harden, Kane Frost is here for your 10 o'clock. Send him in." Kane entered with his characteristic British punctuality, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of barely contained triumph. "Katie, my dear, you're going to want to sit down for this." "That good? Better than good. We've just received confirmation that the European Union wants Obsidian Enterprises to lead their new Sustainable Development Initiative. The contract is worth $150 million over 5 years. Katie did sit down then, not from shock, but from the sheer magnitude of what they'd accomplished. The EU contract. We actually got it. We didn't just get it, we beat out every major consulting firm in the world, including 3 companies that are 10 times our size and have been operating for decades. They chose vision over reputation. They chose you over the establishment. And frankly, after seeing what you've built in 3 months, I understand why." Katie walked to the conference table where architectural plans were spread out, designs for Obsidian's new headquarters, a building that would be a model of sustainable innovation and a symbol of what modern enterprise could achieve when guided by principles rather than just profit. "Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming," she admitted. 6 months ago I was arranging charity luncheons and debating wallpaper colors. Now I'm leading partnerships that will shape international policy. You were always doing this work, Katie. The only difference is that now you're getting credit for it." Ren appeared in the doorway again. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a call from Vera Moon in São Paulo. She says it's urgent." Katie picked up the phone. "Vera, what's happening?" Vera's excited voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "Katie, I have news that will make your day. The Brazilian government has officially blacklisted Vernon Industries from all future contracts. They're citing ethical concerns and reliability issues. And they want to offer those same contracts to Obsidian Enterprises. We're talking about infrastructure development projects worth over $2 billion. Katie met Kane's eyes across the table. $2 billion. More money than Danny had ever dreamed of, offered to her because she'd built a reputation for integrity in less than 6 months. "Vera, that's incredible news, but are you sure we're ready for projects of that magnitude?" "Katie, you've assembled the most talented team I've ever seen. Your people are brilliant, your methods are revolutionary, and your results speak for themselves. Brazil needs what you're offering." After the call ended, Katie and Kane sat in comfortable silence, absorbing the magnitude of what was happening. Obsidian Enterprises wasn't just succeeding, it was reshaping entire industries. "There's something else," Kane said eventually. Something more personal. Oh? I've been monitoring Vernon Industries' bankruptcy proceedings. The final liquidation happened yesterday. Katie felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for what could have been, relief that it was finally over, and something that might have been closure. How are they doing? She asked quietly. Danny's working at a car dealership in Queens. Sales, not management. Gary got a job at a call center. Brandy... Kane hesitated. Tell me. Brandy's working at a coffee shop downtown. She was photographed by a tabloid magazine last week, and the headline was, "From Princess to Barista, the Fall of the Vernon Dynasty." Katie closed her eyes, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. She'd wanted them to understand consequences, not to be destroyed completely. They're living together in that one-bedroom apartment the court arranged. No car, no savings, no prospects. The legal fees consumed what little they had left. And the criminal charges? Danny pled guilty to tax evasion and fraud. He'll serve 18 months in minimum security. Gary and Brandy were given probation, since they weren't directly involved in the financial crimes. Katie walked back to the window, looking out over the city, where her former family was struggling to rebuild their lives from nothing. She felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a deep sadness for the love that had been lost along the way. She thought about Brandy as a little girl, bringing her dandelions and calling them flowers. She thought about Gary's first baseball game, how proud he'd been when she came to watch. She thought about Danny on their wedding day, so young and full of promise. Kane, I want to do something. Such as set up a fund, anonymous, for people who've lost everything due to corruption, their own or their families, education scholarships, job training, basic living expenses while they rebuild. That's very generous. Call it the Second Chances Foundation. And make sure the application process is available to anyone who needs it, regardless of their circumstances. Kane understood immediately. Katie was offering her former family a way forward without having to ask her directly, a path to redemption that preserved their dignity while acknowledging their need. You realize they might never know it came from you. Good. This isn't about recognition. It's about giving people the opportunity to become better than they were. As if summoned by their conversation, Wren appeared with the afternoon mail. Mrs. Hardin, you've received something unusual. A handwritten letter with no return address. Katie opened the envelope carefully, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was from Brandy, written on cheap stationery in her daughter's familiar script. Mom, I know I have no right to call you that anymore. I know what we did was unforgivable. But I need you to know that I understand now. I understand that you were never the weak one in our family. We were. We were weak and cruel, and so lost in our own arrogance that we destroyed the best thing in our lives. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry, and that I'm proud of what you've built. You've become everything we pretended to be, but never were. I hope someday I can become even a fraction of the woman you are. Love always, Brandy. Katie read the letter twice, feeling tears she hadn't expected. When she looked up, both Kane and Wren were watching her with concern. Everything all right? Kane asked gently. Better than all right, Katie said, folding the letter carefully. Wren, please research the application process for the Second Chances Foundation. I want to make sure it's as accessible as possible. Of course. And Kane, I want to accelerate our timeline for the youth mentorship program. There are young people out there who need to learn that failure doesn't have to be final, that mistakes don't have to define you forever. As the afternoon sun filled her office with golden light, Katie felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with her choices. She'd built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, not through revenge, but through refusing to let cruelty diminish her capacity for grace. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news about your EU contract. Congratulations. You deserve every success. G. Gary. Her son had found a way to reach out without compromising his pride or her boundaries. Katie typed back, "Thank you. I believe good things are ahead for all of us. She meant it. Because the greatest victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in her rise, and in the possibility that even broken families could find their way to redemption. Chapter 8. Desperation Calls. Desperation has a voice all its own. It starts as anger, transforms into pleading, and ends as the broken whisper of people who finally understand what they've lost. Katie sat in her home office. The space that had once been Danny's private domain, now transformed into something warm and welcoming. The mahogany desk remained, but the rest of the room reflected her personality, family photos from happier times, books on sustainable development and ethical leadership, and a window garden filled with the jasmine plants she'd always loved. The evening light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Katie had spent the afternoon replanting her jasmine, transferring them from temporary pots into beautiful ceramic planters she'd found at a local artisan market. The act of nurturing something living felt symbolic. She was cultivating new life in spaces that had once been dominated by Danny's aggressive ambition and cold calculation. Her phone lay silent on the desk, but the voicemail notifications told a different story. 42 missed calls over the past week, all from numbers she knew by heart. She hadn't answered a single one, but she'd listened to every voicemail, watching the evolution of her former family's desperation play out in real time. Each notification was a small monument to their growing panic. She'd categorized them mentally. The angry ones that came first, full of entitlement and demands. Then the confused ones, where they couldn't quite understand why she wasn't responding. Then the scared ones, where reality was beginning to penetrate their bubble of denial. And finally, these latest messages, heavy with a grief that sounded almost genuine. Wren appeared in the doorway with her evening tea. The calls are getting more frequent, I know. Are you going to listen to the new ones? Katie gestured to the phone. Play them. The first message was from 3 days ago, Gary's voice tight, with barely controlled anger. Mom, this is insane. You can't just ignore us forever. We're family. Whatever game you're playing, it's gone too far. Call me back. The second was from Brandy, recorded 2 days later. Mom, please. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. We can be a family again. I miss you so much. Please just talk to me. But it was the third message that made Katie's heart clench. Danny's voice, broken and raw. Katie, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what we did was unforgivable, but I'm begging you, please. Just give me 5 minutes to explain. 5 minutes to tell you how sorry I am. Wren watched Katie's face carefully. They sound different. Desperation has a way of stripping away pretense. The early calls were demands. These sound like actual remorse. Katie pulled up the complete list of voicemails on her phone. The progression was heartbreaking in its clarity. The first calls had been angry, entitled, demanding she stop this nonsense and remember her place. But as days turned into weeks and their situation became more dire, the tone had shifted dramatically. She remembered the first voicemail, left the morning after their dinner. Danny's voice had been cold, businesslike. Katie, you need to sign the remaining documents. Our lawyers will be in touch. Don't make this difficult, as if she were the one being unreasonable. As if throwing her out on her birthday was just a minor administrative matter to be handled efficiently. Play message 15, Katie said softly. Gary's voice filled the room, but this time there was no anger, only exhaustion. Mom, I got fired again today. Third job in 2 months. As soon as employers realize who I am, who we are, they find reasons to let me go. The guy today said he couldn't have that kind of person representing his company. I never realized. I never understood how completely we destroyed everything. Not just our lives, but yours too. I'm so sorry. Message 23 was Brandy sobbing. Mom, I saw you on the news tonight. The story about your EU contract. You looked so beautiful, so strong, so happy. I realized I've never seen you look that happy before. Even when we were a family, even during the good times, you never looked as free as you do now. Maybe we were holding you back all along." Katie pressed pause for a moment, remembering that interview. The journalist had asked her about success, and Katie had laughed, genuinely laughed, in a way she hadn't in years. The camera had caught that moment, and apparently Brandy had seen it. Had seen the difference between the woman who'd raised her and the woman who'd been freed from that burden. Message 31 was Danny again. "Katie, I've been thinking about our wedding day. Do you remember what you said in your vows? That you'd love me even when I couldn't love myself. I never understood what that meant until now. I can't love myself now, Katie. I can't even look in the mirror. But somehow, you still loved me for 22 years, even when I was becoming the monster who would destroy us. How did you do it? How did you love someone who didn't deserve it for so long?" Katie pressed pause, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. She did remember those vows. She'd written them herself, staying up late the night before the wedding, trying to capture everything she felt. She'd believed every word then. The tragedy was that she'd kept believing them for 2 decades too long. "These aren't the same people who laughed at your birthday dinner," Wren observed gently. "No, they're not. But the question is whether this is genuine change or just desperation talking." Does it matter? Katie considered the question seriously. "I think it does. Real change comes from understanding, not just from consequences. They're sorry they got caught, sorry they're suffering. But are they sorry for the pain they caused me? Or just for the pain they're experiencing now?" As if in answer to her question, the phone rang. Danny's number appeared on the screen, and for the first time in weeks, Katie felt tempted to answer. Instead, she let it go to voicemail and played the message immediately. Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "Katie, I know you'll never answer, but I need to say this. I've been sitting in this tiny apartment, looking at a photo from Brandy's graduation. You were so proud that day, so happy for her success. And I realized you were always proud of us. Even when we didn't deserve it, even when we were failing, you found reasons to celebrate who we were becoming. But we were never proud of you, were we? We took credit for your work, dismissed your dreams, treated your love like it was worthless. You deserved a family who cherished you, and instead you got us. I'm so sorry, Katie. I'm so sorry for all of it." The message continued. "I know it's too late. I know we can never be a family again. But I want you to know that watching you succeed, seeing you become everything you were meant to be, it's the only thing that gives me hope. Not hope that you'll forgive us, but hope that maybe, somewhere out there, there's still good in the world. You're proof that good wins sometimes. You're proof that love and integrity and brilliance can triumph over cruelty and corruption. I'm proud of you, Katie. I should have said that every day for 22 years, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you." Katie sat in silence for a long moment after the message ended. Outside her window, the garden she'd replanted was beginning to bloom. Jasmine and roses, lavender and mint, all the flowers she'd never been allowed to grow when this was Danny's house. The scent drifted in through the open window, sweet and healing. "He sounds different," Wren said finally. "He sounds broken. Is that enough? Is brokenness enough to rebuild on?" Katie stood and walked to the window, looking out at her garden. "I don't know, but I think forgiveness isn't about whether they've suffered enough. It's about whether I can let go of their capacity to hurt me. And can you? I already have. The question is whether there's room in my life for people who are trying to become better than they were." She thought about the Second Chances Foundation she'd created, about all the people who would apply, hoping for redemption, about the belief she'd built her entire new empire on, that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to be permanent, that grace was stronger than vengeance. The phone rang again. This time it was Brandy. Katie stared at the screen for a long moment, then made a decision that surprised them both. She answered. "Hello, Brandy." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Brandy finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "Mom, you answered. I did. I thought you'd never speak to me again." I thought so too. Mom, Brandy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you did to me that night was cruel beyond words. You broke something in me that I didn't think could be broken, but you also freed me to become who I was always meant to be. I know. I see that now. Do you? Or do you just see that I'm successful and you're not? The question hung in the air between them. Katie waited, giving her daughter time to really consider the answer. Both, Brandy finally whispered. I see that you're successful, and I'm jealous and desperate and scared. But I also see that you're happy in a way you never were with us. And that makes me realize how much we took from you, how much we stole from your life. What do you want from me, Brandy? I want to be your daughter again, but I know I'm not. I know I gave up that right. So I guess I want to be someone you could be proud of. Someday, if I work hard enough to deserve it. Katie closed her eyes, feeling the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. Brandy? Yes? There's a foundation I've started. For people who want second chances. People who've made mistakes and want to rebuild their lives with integrity. Look into the Second Chances Foundation, Mom. And Brandy, call me in 6 months. If you've done the work, real work, not just apologies, then maybe we can have coffee. Katie hung up before her daughter could respond, her hands shaking with the magnitude of what she'd just offered. A chance. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but the possibility of both if they proved they'd learned to be better than they were. It was more than they deserved, but perhaps it was exactly what they needed. Chapter 9, The Reckoning Approaches. There are moments when the universe conspires to bring all players to the same stage, where past and present collide in a symphony of truth that can no longer be avoided. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel had been transformed into something magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with white orchids and gold accents, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. This was Katie's night, the official launch of Obsidian Enterprises' new global headquarters, an event that had drawn leaders, politicians, and philanthropists from around the world. The room hummed with energy and anticipation. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated, from the placement of the floral arrangements to the lighting that made everyone look their best. This wasn't just a launch party, it was a statement. A declaration that Katie Harden had not just survived her destruction, but had transformed it into something beautiful and powerful. Katie stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the grace and confidence of someone who had finally found her place in the world. She wore a midnight blue gown that complemented her silver hair, which she'd allowed to grow long and elegant. At 44, she looked more radiant than she had in decades. There was a lightness to her movements, a genuine warmth in her smile that hadn't been there when she was married to Danny. Freedom, it seemed, had a glow all its own. Mrs. Harden. Ambassador Richardson approached with his wife, both beaming with admiration. The transformation you've achieved is nothing short of remarkable. From tragedy to triumph in less than a year, it's inspiring. Thank you, Ambassador. But I prefer to think of it as finally becoming who I was always meant to be. Across the room, Kane Frost raised his champagne glass in her direction. The event was packed with people who had come not just to celebrate Obsidian's success, but to pay tribute to a woman who had redefined what leadership could look like. Katie. Vera Moon approached with Kai Storm, both of them practically glowing with excitement. Have you seen the evening news? The coverage of tonight's event is international. They're calling it the new standard for ethical enterprise. More importantly, Kai added with a grin, our Tokyo office reported 15 new partnership inquiries just today, all citing your leadership model as the deciding factor. Katie smiled, but part of her attention was focused on the entrance. She couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen, though she couldn't explain why. Wren appeared at her elbow with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Hardin, security is reporting an issue at the front entrance. 3 individuals without invitations are requesting entry, claiming to be family members." Katie's heart stopped. "Are they? Security says they match the descriptions you provided for certain people who shouldn't be admitted without your express permission." Through the ballroom's glass doors, Katie could see them, Danny, Gary, and Brandy, standing in the hotel lobby looking haggard and desperate. They'd somehow managed to find decent clothes for the occasion, but there was no hiding the defeat in their posture, the desperation in their faces. "What would you like me to do?" Wren asked gently. Katie watched her former family through the glass, noting how they stood close together, supporting each other in a way they never had when they were destroying her. Danny kept checking his watch nervously, while Brandy wrung her hands and Gary paced in small circles. How did they even know about tonight? Katie wondered aloud. The event has been covered extensively in the media, and Wren hesitated. And what? The Second Chances Foundation sent acceptance letters this week. To all 3 of them, Katie's breath caught. She'd forgotten that her anonymous foundation would have processed their applications, along with hundreds of others. They'd been accepted into the program based on their essays about wanting to rebuild their lives with integrity, not knowing their benefactor was the woman they'd betrayed. They don't know it's my foundation. The letters came from our legal team with no mention of your involvement. But Mrs. Hardin, their essays were remarkable. Real accountability, genuine remorse, detailed plans for making amends. Either they've become exceptional actors, or they've truly changed. Katie looked around the ballroom filled with her new life, partnerships built on respect, friendships forged through shared values, success achieved through honor rather than deception. Everything she'd built was beautiful and strong and clean. She'd worked so hard to create this world, this space where integrity mattered more than appearances, where authenticity was valued over performance. And now the people who had tried to destroy her were standing at her door, asking to be let in. "Let them in," she said finally. "Are you sure? Post additional security nearby, but let them in. If they've truly changed, they deserve the chance to prove it. If they haven't," Katie's voice grew firm, "then they'll reveal that truth in front of everyone who matters to me." As security escorted her former family into the ballroom, a gradual hush fell over the crowd. Word spread quickly through the gathering. These were the people who had betrayed Katie Hardin, who had tried to destroy her, now appearing at her moment of greatest triumph. Danny, Gary, and Brandy stood just inside the entrance, looking around the magnificent space with expressions of awe and something that might have been grief. They could see what Katie had built without them, the heights she'd reached after they'd tried to drag her down. "They look different," Kane murmured, appearing beside Katie. He was right. Gone was the arrogance that had once defined them. Danny's shoulders were hunched with humility. Gary's cocky swagger had been replaced by genuine nervousness, and Brandy's entitled sneer had transformed into something approaching reverence. Katie walked toward them slowly, aware that every eye in the room was watching this encounter. Cameras flashed discreetly as society photographers captured what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments of the year. She could feel the weight of hundreds of gazes on her back, could sense the collective holding of breath as the entire ballroom waited to see what she would do. This moment would define not just her relationship with her former family, but her entire legacy. Would she be remembered as the woman who destroyed her enemies, or the woman who transformed them? When she reached them, all 3 seemed to shrink under her gaze. But instead of the groveling she might have expected, they stood with quiet dignity, waiting for her to speak first. "You came," she said simply. "We had to," Danny said deep, his voice barely above a whisper. "We had to see what you've built. We had to witness the empire you created without us. And what do you see?" Gary spoke next, his voice thick with emotion. "We see what we prevented you from becoming for 20 years. We see the leader you always were, finally free to show the world who you really are. We see grace, Brandy added, tears already starting to fall, and power that doesn't need to destroy others to prove itself. We see everything we pretended to be, but never were. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Hundreds of the world's most influential people watched this family drama unfold, sensing they were witnessing something historic. "Why are you here?" Katie asked. "What do you want from me?" Danny stepped forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him like a penitent. "We want to apologize publicly, in front of everyone whose respect you've earned. We want them to know that what happened to you wasn't your fault, it was ours. We want to make sure history records the truth about who you are and who we were." "We know we don't deserve forgiveness," Gary continued. "We know we threw away something precious and can never get it back. But we can tell the truth about what really happened, and we can try to become people worthy of having been your family. Even if we can't be that anymore," Brandy finished. Katie looked at each of their faces, searching for any trace of the cruel, entitled people who had laughed at her pain. Instead, she saw humility, genuine remorse, and something she'd never expected to see from them: respect. "You received letters this week," she said. "From the Second Chances Foundation." All three nodded. "You don't know who founded that program, do you?" They shook their heads, confused by the apparent change of subject. Katie smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given them in almost a year. "I did. I created the Second Chances Foundation because I believe people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of becoming better than they were." The shock on their faces was complete. Danny's eyes filled with tears, Gary covered his face with his hands, and Brandy let out a small sob. You're giving us a second chance." Danny whispered. "I'm giving you the opportunity to earn one." Around them, the crowd began to murmur with amazement and approval. This wasn't just a launch party anymore. It was a masterclass in forgiveness, leadership, and the power of principled action. Katie raised her voice so the entire ballroom could hear her. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my former family. They made terrible choices that hurt me deeply, but they're here tonight because they've begun the hard work of becoming better people. They're proof that transformation is possible for anyone willing to face their mistakes honestly." The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation. It wasn't just appreciation for Katie's grace. It was recognition of something extraordinary happening before their eyes. But as the applause died down, Katie realized this was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come. Chapter 10. The Final Gift. The ultimate power is not the ability to destroy your enemies, but the wisdom to transform them into something better than they ever imagined they could become. Katie stood at the podium as the evening's formal program began, looking out over an audience that included presidents of multinational corporations, ambassadors from 6 countries, and 3 people who had once called her pathetic. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all Katie herself. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This speech would be remembered, quoted, analyzed, but more than that, it would either heal or permanently sever the bonds with her former family. The choice was hers, and hers alone. She thought of all the nights she'd spent preparing for this moment, not just the speech itself, but the emotional journey that had brought her here. The tears, the rage, the grief, and finally, the peace that came with understanding her own power. "When I was invited to speak tonight about the future of ethical enterprise," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "I thought I would talk about market strategies, sustainable practices, innovative partnerships. But standing here now, I realize that the most important lesson about building something lasting isn't found in boardrooms or balance sheets. It's found in the courage to remain. Principled when principle costs you everything." She paused, her eyes finding Danny, Gary, and Brandy in the crowd. They sat at a table in the back, listening with the intensity of students trying to understand a lesson that could change their lives. 18 months ago, I thought I knew what strength looked like. I thought it meant enduring betrayal, accepting disrespect, sacrificing my dreams to keep peace in my family. I thought loyalty meant protecting people from the consequences of their choices, even when those choices were destroying both them and me. A murmur of recognition rippled through the audience. Katie's story had become legend, the woman who had lost everything and built something greater from nothing. I was wrong about all of that. Real strength isn't about what you can endure, it's about what you refuse to accept. Real loyalty isn't protecting people from truth. It's loving them enough to let them face the consequences of their actions so they have the opportunity to grow. Katie's voice grew stronger, more confident. The empire I built the first time was built on compromise. I compromised my vision to make others comfortable. I compromised my voice to avoid conflict. I compromised my dreams to maintain relationships that were slowly poisoning everyone involved. She looked directly at her former family now. But sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses. Sometimes love means walking away. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is let people experience the full weight of their choices. Danny was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotions he'd suppressed for months. Gary had his head in his hands, while Brandy watched Katie with an expression of profound regret and growing understanding. The people who hurt me taught me something invaluable, Katie continued. They taught me that I had been living smaller than necessary, dreaming smaller than possible, achieving less than I was capable of, because I was afraid of making others feel inadequate by comparison. She smiled, and it was radiant. They freed me to become who I was always meant to be. Not through their kindness, but through their cruelty. Not through their support, but through their betrayal. And for that, for forcing me to discover my own strength, I am grateful. The audience was transfixed. This wasn't a typical corporate presentation. This was a woman sharing the deepest truths of her transformation. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others leaned forward in their seats, unwilling to miss a single word. The energy in the room had shifted from polite attention to something electric, something transcendent. But the story doesn't end there, Katie said, her tone shifting. Because the most remarkable thing about human beings is our capacity for change. The people who destroyed my old life are not the same people sitting in this room tonight. She gestured toward her former family. Danny, would you join me up here? The shock on Danny's face was complete. He sat frozen for a moment, clearly terrified of what she might ask him to do in front of this powerful audience. It's all right, Katie said gently. Trust me. Danny stood on unsteady legs and walked to the front of the room. When he reached the podium, Katie handed him the microphone. Tell them, she said simply. Tell them what you told me in your voicemails. Tell them the truth about who you were and who you're trying to become. Danny stared at the microphone in his hands, then out at the sea of expectant faces. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. My name is Danny Vernon, and I am the man who destroyed the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. The ballroom was so quiet that his soft words carried to every corner. For 22 years, Katie built our empire while I took credit for her work. She forged relationships while I claimed her connections. She innovated while I presented her ideas as my own. And when she had given me everything she had to give, I threw her away like she was nothing. His voice grew stronger, more determined. I'm also a criminal. I evaded taxes, laundered money, and corrupted everything she had built with integrity. When she tried to protect me by documenting my crimes instead of reporting them, I interpreted her loyalty as weakness. I thought her love made her a fool. Danny looked directly at Katie. I was the fool. I destroyed the one person who truly loved me, who believed in the best version of myself, even when I couldn't see it. And I did it publicly, cruelly, with the help of our children, because I was too small to understand the greatness standing right beside me. He turned back to the audience. Katie Harden is not just a brilliant leader. She is a woman of such grace that she has created a foundation to help people like me rebuild their lives with honor. She's giving me a second chance I don't deserve, but that I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn." Danny handed the microphone back to Katie, then did something that stunned everyone in the room. He dropped to his knees in front of her, in front of hundreds of the world's most powerful people, and spoke words that would be quoted in schools for decades to come. "Katie, I cannot undo the past. I cannot give you back the years I stole or repair the trust I shattered. But I can promise you this: I will spend every day for the rest of my life becoming a man worthy of having been your husband. Not because I hope to win you back, but because the world needs more people trying to live up to your example." The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then Katie did something that surprised even herself. She reached down and helped Danny to his feet. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the truth, for the accountability, for showing everyone here that transformation is possible if we have the courage to face who we've been and the commitment to become better." She addressed the audience one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what ethical leadership looks like. It's not about being perfect, it's about being honest about our imperfections and doing the hard work of growing beyond them. The future isn't just about profit margins and market share. It's about creating environments where people can become the best versions of themselves." The applause was thunderous, but Katie held up her hand for silence. "Tonight, Obsidian Enterprises is announcing our newest initiative, the Transformation Project. We will partner with individuals and organizations committed to authentic change, providing resources, mentorship, and opportunities for people who want to rebuild their lives and careers with integrity." She looked at Danny, Gary, and Brandy. "Our first participants will be 3 people who once called me pathetic. Now they're going to help us prove that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to do the work." As the standing ovation filled the ballroom, Katie felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the complete alignment of who she was with who she was meant to be. She had built an empire greater than anything she'd lost. But more importantly, she had discovered that the greatest power wasn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It was the wisdom to help them transform into allies. Danny, Gary, and Brandy approached the podium together, their faces wet with tears, but shining with something that looked like hope. Behind them, the entire ballroom watched in stunned appreciation, witnessing something rare and precious, the moment when justice and mercy became the same thing. "We don't know how to be a family anymore," Brandy said softly. "But maybe we can learn to be something better. Maybe we can learn to be people who deserve to be in your life." Katie smiled, and for the first time in 18 months, it included all of them. "Then let's find out," she said. Outside the ballroom windows, the city sparkled with possibility, and Katie Harden, architect of empires, transformer of lives, living proof that grace is the ultimate power, looked toward a future where even the most broken things could be made beautiful again. The woman who had been called pathetic had become untouchable. But her greatest victory wasn't in rising above her destroyers. It was in lifting them up with her. The end! But as Katie walked toward her new destiny with her transformed family beside her, she knew this wasn't really an ending at all. It was the beginning of something unprecedented, a legacy built not on the destruction of enemies, but on the transformation of broken people into forces for good. And in boardrooms around the world, a new question would be asked of every leader: what would Katie Harden do?